I always seem to give the most important lectures on the days that the fewest number of people are likely to show up, like right after Halloween and right before Thanksgiving. I don't do it on purpose, it just turns out. But let me go over it again and focus on the main points on it, so that we're all more or less on the same page. So what Nietzsche is trying to explain is, we might think of it this way: how did we ever come to think that something that, in a sense, we all know is not valuable, is valuable? So we're in a funny position with respect to something like poverty and spirit. We're told that God really likes it. We're told that he's against riches and worldly success. But we find it hard to believe, even though we also believe it. That is, when we read it, we don't think, yeah, well, that's just rubbish. Right? We find ourselves attracted by it, even though at the same time, inside, we sort of don't just sign on to it. And Nietzsche wants to explain that double thing. How did it ever come to be the case that this could even fly? Why weren't that just when Christ gave the Sermon on the Mount? Why didn't everybody just start laughing and go home? Right? As if someone were to say, well, I'll tell you what you need. If you want to be happy in life, you need to get a little red stuffed squirrel. It's stupid. You don't have to be like, you don't have to have a high IQ or have studied astrophysics to think the key to life can't be a little red stuffed squirrel, right? That's just yeah, well, I guess Christ had an audience like you guys, he thought. They all went, oh yeah, right, poverty and spirit, I can sign on to that. Okay, so what we want to do is understand, Nietzsche thinks, how that came about. And he does it by telling us a story, which he calls a genealogy, which just means this is how it happened, right? And a genealogy, as I said last time, was best thought of as a kind of epistemic engine, like a microscope or a telescope. It helps us to see a long period of time in the form of a compressed little narrative, so that we can see what can happen over a long period of time. So this is the way Nietzsche thinks something happens. So you start with a small agrarian. I don't think Spot is a good dog. Bad dog. So you start with a little group of farmers, all busy living happy little farming lives. Getting up in the morning, milking the cow, getting the eggs, all that stuff. And everything is fine until out come the blonde beasts, as Nietzsche calls them, warriors, raiding warriors from the north, who appear like a fate, as Nietzsche puts it. It just happens. They might have gone somewhere else, but they didn't. And here they are. And they take over they enslave the farmers. So these are warriors. The Norsemen, they show up in boats. They've got helmets with horns on them. The next thing you know, you're a slave, right? So they come and they enslave these guys. And then two forces occur, over time, of course, but two forces happen. One among the farmers and one among the blonde beasts. So I think the one that happens among the blonde beasts is the easiest to understand. So let's start with that. Nietzsche says they get increasingly decadent. So we understand it, right? You've got your parents, just imagine, your parents were hard-working, working-class people who struggled to make every penny they got, and they saved up their money and were frugal, and what do? They give it to you so you can waste it on rubbish like taking classes at university, right? And they think you shouldn't have to do what they have to do. you should have it easier than they had it. They try to make life better for you, they buy you stuff, they spoil you, right? That's a common human phenomenon, right? Moreover, once you've enslaved the darn farmers, right, you don't want to go off raiding and warrioring anymore. You want to sit on your asses in nice comfortable palaces and eat good stuff, and why leave, right? You've lucked out. You might as well stay where you are, right? So notice the warriors stop kind of being warriors, right? They just stay on. They kind of become sort of policemen, slave owners, guardians, and their children become increasingly decadent. So that's one, the force over here is one of, as we move through time, increasing decadence. That's it. That's common. Everybody understands it. Right, as soon as you get a little bit of leisure or a little bit of extra money, right, you start giving back a little more. And if the kids are the kids of the ruling class, well, look at the kids of our rulers, right? What do they do? Nothing, right? They just drive around in nice cars and stuff. Okay, so that's what happens over there among the plantations. And what happens over here among the farmers is more interesting, but it's a little harder to grasp. So Nietzsche relies on a fact of psychology, which we all understand. As soon as we hear it, we know it's true, right? Which is that when we don't get something in reality, we get it in fantasy. We tell ourselves little stories about having it, right? We imagine having it. We dream about having it, right? We go inside and start, So if you hit me and you're too big for me to hit back, what do? I think, right? And I seethe on the inside, and I think, if only I had my Glock with me, I could just blow that guy right now. And you say take a fantasy revenge, right? Well, I'll do it all the time, right? And Nietzsche says, so over here, you got strengthening fantasy. Well, I think that's nothing. But Nietzsche's thought is, everything is kind of like a muscle. The more you use it, the bigger it gets. If you don't use it, you lose its power, but if you're forced to use it, it gets better. So the farmers get better and better at fantasizing. And think of the forms that takes. It takes the forms of telling stories about revenge, how one day they'll take over and they'll be the masters and the masters will be the slaves. It's as common as anything, right? That oppressed people, great nations that have been colonized, for example, tell stories about liberation and freedom and how one day they're going to get it all back, and then they're going to screw these guys who've been busy screwing them, right? That's the thought. Again, it's perfectly natural human. And that's what Nietzsche says, I've got a great nose for psychology, so I'm going to tell you psychologically plausible stories. There won't be any mysteries in my stories, right? These will be all straightforward, you'll understand them. So over here we got strengthening fantasy, we got tale telling, the creation of song, right? Because we need to be able to remember the good stories, we pass them on, people get good at being storytellers, they train and select the good storytellers like the good musicians. Before you know where you are, you've got the birth of the blues, right? That's the thought, right? It's out of oppression that comes these great liberating fantasies that are embodied in songs and stories and dances and so forth. So that's what you've got going on over here. And notice what that does. It strengthens the mind. Right? If you're busy using your mind all the time, right, to tell stories, remember them, encode them, learn fancier stories, be able to tell them, recite them well, right, all that stuff. That's going on up in here, right? So at the same time as the slaves are out there working in the fields all day, when they come home at night and they sit around their fire, they tell stories, right? And they get better at it. So over here you've got, as I would say, strengthening fantasy and mind. Growth. Now let's look at the content of the fantasy. So let's pull out the fantasy element and look at its content. And what are the fantasies about? Well, they're about revenge. And to understand revenge, Neitzche says, you've got to understand what he calls ressentiment, which is kind of like resentment, but it's a fancier, nice French name for it, but indicates a small difference. So ressentiment is a mixture of envy and hatred. And it's the potent mixture of those two. So here's the thought, right? I hate them because they oppress me. I want to be them so I can take revenge on them. I want to, it's a double side, right? I want to be in the position they're in, but I hate them. Right? Very simple. And it's that double-sidedness, it's the mixture of envy and hatred, what Neitzche thinks is important to understand. So when we have envy and hatred, we're going to see what form the revenge fantasy takes. And so the thought is, it takes the form of the great pro-slave hero. One day, a great hero will come, just like those guys came out of the north. One day a great hero will come. He'll be on our side. He'll like the slaves. He'll hate the masters. He'll overthrow them. He'll make us the masters. Then we'll get our revenge on those damn ex-masters. A very simple story, right? You can imagine it, right? Oh. Now let's take a look at how that hero responds. So now we want to take the hero and how he looks at the slaves and how he looks at the masters. So now we have to add a layer. So the blonde beasts, when they look at the slaves, at the slave farmers, they say they're wretched, weak, right? Cowardly, poor, fawning. Right? Look at them. Look. You go out on the field, you know, if one looks at you crossway, give him a kick. And what does he do? Huh? Does he get up and fight you like a man? No. He just lies there and takes it. Right? Who'd want to be one of those? So you can think that over in the warrior neck of the woods, right, there's just a kind of feeling of how wretched and hopeless and awful the slaves are. Who would want to be one of those? And I think we can feel it, right? Would you rather be a master or a slave? It's kind of a no-brainer. Maybe you don't want to be either, but if you have to be one or the other, you certainly don't want to be the slave. Right? That would like wanting to be poor in spirit. Right? Why would I want that? Right? That's the thought. So when the blonde bees look at these guys, they look at these, and so sum all that up, it just says call them bad. And then he gives you a little etymological argument, which we don't need to worry about. You know, about how that's actually how the word bad and good got their meaning. Neitzche studies philology, so he probably knows a little bit about it. They're bad. They're what you don't want. They're the disvalued, right? And when they look at themselves, though, when the blonde beasts, so when they look in here, right, that's what they say. But when they look here, we're good, right? We're the ones you want to be. We're in the good situation. We're the valuable ones. We're the ones that anyone in their right mind would care about. Those people are wretched, awful scum. Who wants them, right? They're only good for one thing. you know, that sort of thing. So this is how good and bad these two terms. This is how they get their meaning. From that little story. The good people and the bad people. The wretched and the strong. The meek and the powerful. Right, that whole rigmarole. But now Nietzsche says, look, when you look at the hero, let's look at how the hero looks. So the hero looks at the farmers, and he looks at the blonde beasts. Right? So think of him valuing the world. How is he to value it? Right? Can you see all right? So you see my little line? Goes all the way over there. Yeah? So the hero, remember he's a figure in a story. He's an imagined being. He looks, but in the story, what does he do? He's on the side of the slaves. And he's against the masters. Right? So what does he say? And Nietzsche says, this is where good and evil come in. Right? He looks at these guys, the blonde beasts. See this line here? This one? He looks at them and he says, they're evil. And he looks at these guys and he says, they're good. I'm on the against for, right? And that's Nietzsche says, once you've understood, right, in the fantasy, the hero, the one who will come back and help slaves to get their revenge, has to have this inverted value system to play the role he does. You see how the value system gets started. As yet, it's only in a fantasy, right? It's just in the story. The hero of the story is on the side of the slaves, and he's against the masters. And that's just a guy in a story. Yes? So far, so good? Okay, now comes the really interesting part. Or not just all of that's interesting too, I think, but here comes the next step. It's how those values that start in fantasies become real. Actually escape from the fantasy out into the real world and become powerful in reality, not just in the fantasy. And it goes like this. Look, increasing decadence, increasing mind growth. These are two powers. And in the old world, the power of the warriors was dominant. But now let's see what happens. So warriors being what they are, right, they're lazy. Once they get a chance to stop playing, they've had a hard life, they don't want it anymore. And so they start alienating as much as possible onto the slaves. At first, the slaves just farm. But then, you know, there's child care. Well, who wants to do that? Right, so you get wet nurses and so on. What about cleaning the house and doing the dishes? Huh? Let the slaves do it, right? There's a term in Hollywood, rich Hollywood folk have, which is called a chore whore. Not awful. That's just that's the thought of it. You know, you get somebody to do all that stuff for you. And since who the hell would want to do that? You, of course, don't think very highly of them. You pay them minimum wage or a little bit more, and you call them that. Who's your chore whore? Who does that stuff for you? Well, horrible. Yeah. But that's exactly the way the masters think. Right? They think, hire people. No, you don't even have to hire them. Bring them in and make them do it. So the slaves take on more and more roles. Well, let's look at some of the roles. So, for example, you want them to be your estate manager. I mean, who wants to be out there counting the bushels of corn, making sure how many cattle, whose cattle is who, making deals? So get somebody else to do it. So paying all those numbers and everything else. Right? You want the slaves to do more of the dreary, but still requiring a lot of mind work stuff to do, keeping the books, keeping the accounts, running the household, doing, all those take a lot of intellectual skills. Moreover, of course, you don't want to teach the children. Nobody in their right mind would want to be a teacher, right? So what you do is, you hire slaves to do that for you. So you start with a nanny, brings up the baby, then you have a tutor for the kids, right? And you send, right? You do all that stuff, just gets alienated. Because really, from the point of view of the warrior, nobody would want to do that, right? So you just alienate it onto the slaves. So now let's tell ourselves a little story, right? So here's the little boy. You can, if you read 18th and 19th century English novels, you'll find a lot of the same things. Like the upper classes didn't bring up their children. They were brought up by the staff and the servants. And the deep emotional attachments that a child normally forms for caregivers, instead of being formed for the parents, is now formed for the nanny. So little British public school boys love their nannies, right? Why? Because nanny brought them up, you know, took care of them, sung them to sleep at night, all those stuff that, you know, normally, so to speak, in a poorer household, the mother would do, but in a wealthy one, why would she want to get up in the morning and do any of that stuff, you know, when they've got somebody to do it? And we see that replicated in our own class structure. So now, we've got a strong emotional bond for the nanny. Now let's just imagine a little bit of the story, right? When baby needs to be sung to sleep at night, what does nanny sing? Well, the songs she knows, right? And what songs are those? Well, they're, as we say, songs of freedom, right? Songs about the state of slaves, right? And when she tells the son, the little boy, you know, what it's like to, what's it like at your house, nanny? Is it like our house? Can we go and see your house? But the little boy notices the big difference. Why is nanny treated, my lovely nanny, why is she treated that way, right? And then moreover, there are friendships that form between the children of the masters and the children of slaves, because, you know, children don't know any different, thank goodness. So actually they form affectionate bonds wherever they want to play with, right? And they have to be told things like, don't you play with them, right? Rather they will, right? So you've got a growing affectional power, and affections for nature are powers too. When you love somebody or care about them, that's a source of power to them, and of course to you, right? Friends help each other, friends are attached to one another, friends will do things for one another. Emotional connections are powerful bonds. So now we imagine, right, the sons, we keep the story going, and eventually you have sons of warriors who share and understand and have attachment to the values of slaves, right, because of the story I just told. So now you can imagine one of the slave-owning sons inherits the estate and decides to liberate the slaves, or make the slaves' conditions much better, or help nanny, or, right, stop nanny's children from being sold off into slavery because they're his friends. Okay? This is actually close to a story, reality. And eventually, what you get, as I pointed out, is the proclamation, the Emancipation Proclamation, where you have the President of the United States, Lincoln, read that now all slaves are free, and that the power of the United States will support them in their freedom. Right? That's the thought. So, right, that's Nietzsche's story. It's the story about how that comes about, right? But notice what it is. It's now that the story, the fantasy values, that were at first just the values of somebody in a story, now become the values of somebody in reality. And they become that through actual changes in power relations, right? The children brought up by the slave tutors learn how to understand the slaves in a positive way, right? The slave, so why is it that you guys all work on the slaves? I saw I saw the overseer whipping one guy out there. Why does that happen? And the tutor says, well, once upon a time we were free and enjoying everything. And then, you know, your great-great-grandfather and a bunch of his friends came down and terrorized us and took us over and enslaved us. And the kid said, is that okay? And the kid says, no, it's not okay. And what, would you like it to happen to you? No. Oh. Well, why, what? But surely Daddy can't be a bad man, right? Well, and then you hear more, right? So what you've got is you've got the, I was going to go, think of it this way, right? It's the colonization of the minds of the young, right, in the way that we're seeing, so that they come to understand, share the values of slaves, and not just for some reason like this, that, oh, they see how wonderfully beautiful they are. It's that they have powerful emotional connections to slaves, and that makes them sympathetic and so forth. Okay, tells the story, and in that, Nietzsche says, the world of values gets turned upside down, and the previously good become evil, and the previously bad become good. And then he says, well, all you have to do is turn this thing into the Christian God, whether he exists or not, it doesn't matter. It'd be handy, right, if you invented a character to play a role, and it turned out there really was such a character, right? But that's the picture. So notice that now the features of slaves, look at them, right? Wretched, weak, cowardly, poor, fawning. That's what makes a good slave. Subordinate, right? The features that make you good at being a slave, right, are don't be uppity, don't be, don't stand up for things. Maybe look down. Don't look your master in the eye, right? Don't talk back. Don't you, right? And think of all that being now thought of as good, right? Because the slaves are approved of, and now you're home and dry. Yes? Any questions? You see sort of how the story goes? Yeah, any questions about it? We went through it last time too, and it's on the handout in a fair amount of detail. But yeah.
So are the slaves like conscious of their own resentment?
Well, so that's the next little bit of the story. So this little mechanism helps us to understand other features of the value system that we see in Christianity in an interesting way too. So I think one of the most surprising features of Christian ethics, and this is not true, for example, we often put Judeo-Christian together, but it's not true of the Hebrew Bible or of Jewish thought, but it's very surprising, and we happen to be living with a big piece of it returned, which is Christianity has always seemed in some curious way to be obsessed with sex. It's always had some strange, as we think, attitudes to sex that are hard to understand. There's something wrong with it, right? Sex is not just by itself good, there's something the matter with it. It's kind of murky, dirty, something like that. And you see a lot of that. Reactions to sex that are quite different from our reactions to eating and drinking, for example, which are other appetites. And one of the ways you can get a grip on that is in the same story. So after all, what do the masters like to do? Well, they like to eat, drink, and have sex, right? So their appetites are not repressed at all, right? So they're busy having sex with slave girls, doing whatever they want, right? That's the thought, and that's what powerful people do, especially powerful men, and we've got plenty of examples of that on the front pages of the newspapers these days, right? So the thought is, yeah, so when you, right, now notice the little story, I hate them, right, for their sexual endeavors, as well as for all the other things they do. But look, they raped my daughter, right? There's plenty of reason to hate them for what they do sexually, right? Powerful people do pretty awful things when they get a chance, right? So that's true. But now, I also want to be them. So I want to be able to do sexually what they want to do too. So now I feel two things, right? Envy and shame, right? Because look, that same hero who looks at the masters and says, their sexual appetites are bad, looks at me and says, your sexual wishes are bad. You want to be just like them. So remember, a surprising fact in the Gospel of Matthew is that Christ says, you know, lusting after a woman in your imagination is just as bad as doing it in reality. So notice that's a strange thought, because most of us would think, you know, that if I don't act on it, that's a lot better, right, than if I do. To be told that even wishing, having evil wishes, is terrible. Notice, we all do have them. Right? We all have sexual wishes, even if they're not as repellent as some. But we all have sexual wishes. And now they come back to us. Our own sexuality is given back to us as something that is problematic, that we have to be, in some ways, ashamed of. Right? So, right, this, if we look at the hero and we look at his judgment of these people as bad, right, as evil, rather. So let's just pull out from the evil some of the things that are going on. Well, there'll be sexual desires. Yeah, not just sexual desires, but sexual desires and activities. Right, aggression, violence, indulgence, luxury. All these things that are part, all of these things that are part of the being a master, right, are judged evil by the character in the story who's going to come and revenge the slaves. But at the same time, resentment is in part envy. And that means that the slaves at the same time envy the masters for what they're able to do. And so their own wishes, envious wishes, are now in part, right, things that they have to have a negative attitude to. Now if you think about the desire for wealth. We all have it, I think. Now, what does the gospel tell us? It's easier for a rich person to enter the kingdom of heaven than for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle. So our own wish for wealth, not just the having of it, but the wish for it, is something that stands condemned by the hero, later the God, that looks at those wishes that we have to be like the masters and says, bad, evil, those are evil wishes. You shouldn't have those evil wishes. It's also another thing that we can explain. So it's not that I think the way that we're aware of our own resentment or resentment is not as such. It's in the appearance within us of shame directed towards our own appetites, desires, and so on. So we find Christians find themselves very often ashamed of finding there's something wrong with or wanting to hide. So you can just think about it. I mean, you can pick your favorite one. You know, if someone caught you looking at pornography, would you be ashamed? Why? Well, provided it's not the kind of pornography that is itself something shameful, right? So not child pornography or something like that. But if you just look at naked people of the opposite sex or the same sex or people having sex or any one of those things, why would you think there was anything? Wouldn't that just be healthy curiosity? Maybe you just happen to like it, or it might be that you want to excite your own sexual desires for various reasons. What would be wrong with that? Well, I think we can all feel that our culture tells us, even though it gives us more and more such stuff to look at, right, that we don't feel just completely open. We feel there's something kind of shady about it. We don't mind somebody watching us eating or drinking, but somebody watching us having sex, why? Just the thought of it can seem like a terrible thing. Yeah.
If this is similar to the Byzantine claim, doesn't it run into the same critique that our motivational sets are larger than just appetites?
Well, they're larger than just appetites, but they also have appetites in them. So all that's required for this one is that we find ourselves with desires that, right, our value system says no to, and that nonetheless we can't get rid of, or only very few people do, right? So maybe an ascetic saint could just actually not want any of these things anymore. But to think of, for example, think of the very idea, which has got to seem surprising, I think, that the idea in Catholic branch of Christianity that priests should be celibate, that that the priests shouldn't have sex, right? That their sexual life should be non-existent. That's a very strange thing to require, because sex is part of all of us, right? And the idea that we should say no to a part of us altogether, no sexual life, that can seem very strange until you see it in this context, in which you can see it as the ideal of the whole thing, that only some people manage to write out what they have. So that's one of the virtues of the story, is that it can help us to understand, even if we're not Christians. Right, we nonetheless live in a Christian culture, largely Christian permeated culture. I put it that way, it's not as though the culture is itself wholly Christian, it's permeated with Christian values. So for example, if you look at where the most pornography is consumed in the United States, where would you guess that was? Well, it's in the, yeah.
From the Bible Belt?
Yeah, it's in the Bible Belt, yeah. And what does that tell you? Well, after all, Nietzsche has given us a little story. When you really try to repress things too much, they grow, right? They push back, and the constant force of repression strengthens, right? It doesn't weaken, right? You feel it. If I tell you can't have a drink, or you can't eat that, or you can't do something, what happens, right? Your desire grows. It doesn't just go away. It says, now I'm feeling deprived. Now I want the thing you were forbidding me. So, and the other thing, I think, part of it is that when you're told that you mustn't at all value things that in fact you do value, right? Being wealthy, being well-to-do, I mean, a whole lot of things of this sort, right? The repressive forces have to be very strong, and then the reactive, the chances that you violate them grow. So, okay, so that's the resources of the story are considerable. They help us they cast a light on a whole set of different sides of our value system that are really interesting. So now what we've got on the Nietzschean story is a little bit of a picture of how we can look at values that we've inherited, and we can tell, well, as you say, a sort of Thrasymacheian story about it. That is, we can ask ourselves, are these values that have come about this way good values or bad ones? And we can question elements in the story and say, well, look at the lineage or genealogy of that one. Why would we think that one was good? And I think that for most of us, probably, if we looked at, in particular, attitudes towards sexuality, we would think that actually what we've seen in the world, and maybe to a large extent what we are seeing in the world, is a kind of rebellion against them in a foreign pressure way. So we think of the late 60s and 70s as periods in which sex just burst out of this bubble and started, not just burst out of it. It didn't just say, yeah, we're going to do it anyway. It said, there's nothing wrong with it. It's good, right? We shouldn't feel ashamed of it. We should glory, and we should make love out in the open. We should be naked. We should forget about all these repressive things because they don't actually serve human life. Well, we're seeing a reaction to that, and it's not clear where everything is going to come out, as is always true. But that's a little story about it. Well, that's to look at only the negative, right, as apparently negative, right? That is, we're looking at something where Nietzsche's going to say, there's really no reason to value poverty and spirit. There's really no reason to value meekness. Look what I've just told you. These are the values of slaves that there's no reason to think, right, anybody should otherwise have. So if we look at poverty of spirit and meekness in the story, well, we'll think there's no reason to value those things outside the support system, the Christian support system. We're just looking at them with a kind of neutral eye and not thinking God will punish you if you don't, but we're just looking at them on their merits. we would think there was no particular reason to be against them, or to be against wealth, or to be against luxury, or to be against any of those things. Those seem fine. But it's wrong. Nietzsche's not a simple-minded philosopher. He isn't thinking, okay, so I've told you a little story about the values of slaves. You see, your values are the values of slaves, so why don't you forget them? Right? First, you couldn't, even if you tried. And the other is that Nietzsche thinks the mere fact that they are the values, that some of them are the values of slaves, doesn't mean that they don't have real value. So you've got to, you can't just sweep them all away. What you are given is a reason not to take them at face value, which then says, as Nietzsche says, stands to reason. I don't reject all these things, but I don't value them for the same reason. Not because they're part of the story, right, but for other reasons. So what we want to do now is ask ourselves, what good has come of the story? Right? And though we won't get to do it in the kind of detail we've done in the first essay, which I think is in some ways the most spirited of the three essays anyway. But the third essay, Nietzsche says, well, one of the things that came out of this was the love of the strengthening of our intellects and our focus on knowledge, science, and so on. So the growth of knowledge, science, and all those things, that came out of the very same thing. Well, look at the story. Right? The warriors weren't busy reading books in the library and thinking about how to explain eclipses of the sun and moon, or figuring out how to, right? They were just interested in you, because they had too much of one kind of power, right? They weren't interested in these other things. What was the good of those? And of course you can see a lot of that returning to our own, in our own period, where people say, what's the good of all of that? What's the point of it? You can't make money with that, or it just teaches you not to be Christian, or anyway, it's bad, it's corrupting. A lot of people in America now think that higher education is bad for people. They shouldn't get it. And you can see in the story some of the resources for that. Where is the knowledge? Well, what does the knowledge do? What's the point of it? Right? These are key questions that powerful people, right, can seem, I don't see the point of, I don't know any of that. And I'm one of the richest people in the world, or whatever, right? So it can seem like when we try to value knowledge, we can have questions about it. But Nietzsche certainly doesn't share that view. After all, he's himself a university professor. Right? He's a man of knowledge. And so what he says is, well, one of the things that comes out of the same story is if we just go over here and pull out this, right? We get science. And not to be outdone, if we pull out this, we get art. Well, art and science are not things that we can just say, hey, what's the point of those? Those just seem like meekness and poverty of spirit. Why would anybody want those? When we think about the role, if you're not gung-ho about science, well, just think about art. How much time you spend listening to music, watching films, reading books, right? The entertainment industry is one of the biggest in the world. And what does it do? Well, let's call it generously art, and say that what it does is it produces art. So that's a very important factor, and it grows out of this, right? When you produce art, Nietzsche says, we need an explanation for it. It doesn't just fall off the tree. Why are we artists? Why do we like art? Why do we make art? Why are there painters and poets and so on, and novelists and filmmakers and playwrights and actors and actresses? Huge part of the world. Why? And he says, well, look, reality is unbearable without it. We have art in one way for the same reason that we have alcohol and narcotics. Humankind can't bear too much reality. And you might think, yeah, I mean, right, so Schopenhauer, who Nietzsche was very influenced by, Schopenhauer saw his great image. He said, if you held up a microphone to the world, if you could hold up a microphone to the earth, what you would hear is one loud scream. It's not a happy place, right? Right. And that thought is one of the things. If you look, think about what your life is like, think about how often you need to be distracted, think about how often you need stimuli of one kind or another, think about how dreary a day can be, think how hard it can be to get up in the morning, think about all those things. And Nietzsche says, that's what we need art for. He says, art exists so that the bow won't break. So we won't be overstrained. We're like the slaves. In fact, we're like them in more ways than we might want to imagine. We might think that actually most of us are wage slaves, right? We're just as indentured as these others. So certain things can't happen to us. They can't whip us anymore, right? Or they can't sell us. But, you know, by and large, a huge part of our life is a life that we sell to somebody in return for a wage. And, you know, we can feel in that, too, the same pressure, right, to escape into fantasy, which we do all the time, which you're doing. Just watch yourself. You flicker on and off. Your thoughts are only temporarily on Nietzsche and ethics. A lot of the time, they just flick off onto other more consoling things, right? We're all like that. We do it all the time. If we could watch our minds, right? An ordinary office worker's mind, for example, the company buys 8 hours a day, but they probably get more like about 3 or maybe 2.5. The rest of the time is flickering off onto other things. Right? That's why we don't like you to check your computers, because we know what happens. Right? Surf the web. Just like that, you flick away for a second, look at something a little more fun, flick back, keep it up. How many times are you flicking away to the other thing? Well, that shows you something about the thing that you're flicking away from. If it was all that great, you'd be absorbed in it. Okay, so science, the strength of science grows, and then Nietzsche says that wonderful last essay, he says, and there's a kind of funny side to that too, because what did science end up doing? Killing religion. So religion gave birth to it, right? This fantasy gave birth to it. And now it faces its strongest challenge from something that it actually gave birth to. So he says, every good thing was a bad thing to start with, and every bad thing was a good one, right? Some things, because look, it's how the power relations figure out that tell you something about what value things have. So when the religion was dominant over science, it encouraged science. But when science started to discover things that were inconsistent with religion, the power struggle began. And it's still, as you know, going on, right? So some people think there is no such thing as evolution. And they don't think that because they look at the evidence. Right? Because any sensible person looked at the evidence but couldn't come to that conclusion. They look at the conflict between that and what they take to be the religious story, and then they say, that's got to go, right? Because this is the Word of God, right? So that's a way to think about how that power struggle is still continuing, and we shouldn't be optimistic. It seems to me that Nietzsche doesn't give us any grounds for either pessimism or optimism. After all, it's all a great power struggle. Who knows where it's all going to end? We could decide to close the universities, shoot the professors, think of Pol Pot in Cambodia. We don't think it can't happen here, it can happen anywhere. We just get rid of all the intelligent people who deny what we think to be the truth, because they're just deceiving. What are they doing? They're corrupting the youth like Socrates did. You just get rid of them all, right? And then we'll have harmony and peace at last, and we'll all be singing the same tune. So that's the thought. Okay, so something really good comes out of it as well. So let's look. Can we look at another few little bits that we pulled out? Now when we've got them all on the table, we can talk some more about them. So science and art, these two things, these two are part of the slave revolt in morality, as Nietzsche says. And they were good things. Moreover, you know, some of the things that came out of it were bad things. Right? But one of the things that came out of it that we are very fond of, and that Nietzsche is very unfond of, as out of it came the notion of the equality of human beings, that all people are equal, and notions of human rights and a whole set of things that we think are really good. And Nietzsche, so far I'm thinking, well, you know, we can we could agree with a lot of what Nietzsche says. We could think science and art are really valuable. We could think poverty in spirit and actual poverty are not. We would think the Christian attitude, as it used to be anyway, to sexuality, there's something wrong with that. Or it would be better if we had a different attitude to our sexuality than one of shame and guilt and so forth. We can think all that and we think, yeah, that's great. But then Nietzsche's got some views that we find, many people find really abhorrent. And I want to look at a couple of the abhorrent ones. So one is that Nietzsche thinks that out of this whole, I don't know where to put it, I'm just going to do it this way. Out of all of that came equality, human rights. So think about this. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men were created equal. Now, I don't know about you, but I have two thoughts about this. First, I'm worried about the created part, and then I'm worried about the equal part, and then I'm worried about the men part, and then I'm worried about the all part. But otherwise, I think I can buy it. Right? So when that was enshrined in the Proclamation of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident, all men were created equal. We do have to remember that it was men that played a central role, not women, not people of color, what it meant was essentially white men. And under pressure of social change and all kind of great political movements of liberation, of battles and blood, right? It didn't happen calmly or peacefully. That did get transformed and to be inclusive of women, to it was a women vote and have all kinds of rights. They still don't have equal wages. How long do you think it will be before they do? So how long do you think? Just have a guess. So just think about America, think about you, think about how long it will take for there to be equal pay for equal work for men and women in the United States of America. Oh, you might think, gee, who the hell can tell? And the answer is, well, there are people who actually do research on this stuff and come up with answers. 203 years from now. Man, that's a long time for equal pay. Right, so all kinds of pressures have been created, and revolutionary movements, the great movement for equal rights for people of color, for women, these all took fighting, bloodshed. None of them happened peacefully. It was all. But we say, we're closer to this. So now think about, in our own time, equal rights for gay people, transgendered people, it'd be right, marriage for not for same-sex couples. All kinds of things have changed. And of course, there's a reaction to that too. It's not as if everybody says, yeah, that's great. A lot of people think it's terrible and they want to fight against it. Nonetheless, I think there is a feeling that there has been a great move in the direction of what we call equal rights. And Nietzsche worries about this. And he worries about the way that it gets enshrined in democracy, another thing we're very fond of. And Nietzsche has question marks about those. And many of them appear in those thoughts about sympathy, fellow feeling, those kinds of thoughts. So do you think that it's good to be a sympathetic person? Do you think it's good to be happy? Do you think it's good to feel the pain of others, put yourself in their shoes, those kinds of thoughts? Sympathy, compassion, those things. So Nietzsche's worries about those too, and I'm going to use compassion Is compassion a good thing? And I think most people think compassion is a good thing. It's good to be compassionate. And Nietzsche raises a question about this. And I'm going to try to give you the flavor of his worry. So do you think we should spend more on hospitals or more on universities? Which are more important, hospitals or universities? All those who think hospitals are more important, raise your hand. All those who think universities are more important. So it's kind of a, I think the universities slightly have it over the thing. I think you knew where I was going, maybe, but that's okay. I think the worry that Nietzsche has is that compassion leads you to focus on the wretched of the earth, the people who are on the losing battle. So it says, so imagine it in part of the slave revolt this way. So look at the hero. He's compassionate towards the slaves, right? He feels their pain. He sees how wretched they are, right? And he wants to do something about it. If he were a different kind of hero, he'd think, hey, look at those guys. They're really living it up. I think I'll drop in over there, right? It requires the hero to see the suffering of the wretched as a motive for doing something about it. So the thought is that what the slaves want is somebody who says, it's awful to be sick, weak, meek, in need of help, right? Focus there. Now the other side, the other way to look at it would be, no, don't do that. Focus on strengthening the good. Don't put your resources on. It doesn't mean you should just leave them there to die. It just means, where should you be thinking you should look? Let me give you another example. So we're constantly invited to give money because there are lots of people where there are famines, there are people in refugee camps, there are people who are suffering ethnic cleansing. And really the world, not just right here, but if we were, go into parts even of Europe and see what happens, the bodies that are washed up on the shore because people are trying to escape from North Africa to Italy and get into Europe. What happens to them when they get there? How many people are in refugee camps or concentration camps of one kind or another? Huge percentage of the world's population. What you would, we're encouraged to help them, right? To give our resources to them to make their lives better. And that's a constant plea. If you're doing contemporary ethics, you'll find a lot of people arguing very strenuously for this. And so you can look at things that way and think, I should be looking there with my dollars, right? I should be taking my resources and putting them there to help them. Now think of a different thought. No, I shouldn't be doing that. I should be taking I shouldn't be doing exclusively that, or mostly that, or only that. Instead, I should be taking my dollars and strengthening the forces of reason and so on. The thought is, should I be looking to the wretched and hoping to improve their lot, or should I be looking to the powerful and trying to empower, right? Looking to other things and trying to empower them. So different thought would be, without political change, real political change, the wretched are not going to be made, that much better off. It's what we want to do is to change the world that produces the refugees and produces poverty and produces the oppressed, not take the actually oppressed and give them something. So it's sort of like, should I put a Band-Aid on this, or shall I ensure that there are no more? Nietzsche thinks that compassion, when we encourage it, if we encourage it especially by itself, or give it a primary place, that he says, the strong, as he puts it, tend to waste their energy on the weak. And I think that that's a very strenuous way of putting it. Most people are offended by it. They don't like that. They think, no, of course we should care for them. And I think that the right answer is that this is a provocative claim on Nietzsche's part to try to correct something. Not to get rid of compassion, but to give compassion a different role. Is that okay? Give compassion a different role and say that, yes, but not at the cost of changing the world that creates the very problem that you are trying to address. So when you're, of course, so a compassionate person is motivated too quickly to alleviate suffering and not motivated enough to think out how best to use the resources to change the world better. And I think Nietzsche is right about that. That is, not that we should never, so if somebody falls down in front of you and needs to be taken to the hospital, you should think, oh, screw it, man, I'm too busy. I'm strengthening something else to waste my time on a sick person like you. No, or that we should be inhumane to the sick, or we shouldn't have hospitals. That's ridiculous. We're all get sick at some point. You need good hospitals. The thought is about how compassion looks when it's given primary place in the value system versus what happens when it's given place together with other forces that are very important. So that's compassion, of course, very closely tied to these other notions, right? It's not the same, but it's very much at the center of what makes equality, human rights, democracy all seem really important, is that they kind of express our feeling towards others that they shouldn't be, they should have equal chances. Now Nietzsche takes another thought. So he says, well, what do you think? Do you think it's better to produce a whole lot of kind of fairly average, fairly mediocre, but pretty contented people, or to produce geniuses? So, I mean, you can make it dramatic for yourself. Would you like to have an exceptional child, or just a kind of ordinary but happy child? So take that second one. You're going to have a child. Maybe you're already pregnant, or you're already the father of a soon-to-be child. And you're talking as prospective parents do about the kind of child they hope they'll get. And one says, I hope we get a little Einstein. I know they can be kind of troubled. I know it can be difficult to build them up, but I hope we get an Einstein or a Mozart. The other says, no, I just want a happy child, just an ordinary happy child will be fine. So which would you wish? Most parents want an ordinary happy child. And that's a fact. I mean, they think, no, I don't want an exceptional child. I mean, exceptional children, right? They don't make friends, they're not popular, they're hard to bring up, they're smarter than you are. Right? Who wants that, right? And I think that that's the other worry that Nietzsche has. That worry when we find ourselves thinking that average is better than best, we're in fact going to create a world in which average will dominate best. And Nietzsche thinks that's a terrible thing to do, because in a way he thinks this way, right? He thinks, actually what makes the world worthwhile are the geniuses who produce the great art, the great things that actually, that's part of what, they're the flowers that make the whole thing kind of worthwhile. They're not, right, the exceptions that we'd be better off without. They're actually the exceptions that make the whole thing good. Without them, that was the famous play of Tom Stoppard's. So you've got a philosopher in his wife says to him, you wish that philosophy would just rule the world. And the philosopher says, my dear, if philosophy ruled the world, it would be one great field of soybeans. It's a very interesting little thought. The thought is you can get think, we should be feeding everyone. How's the easiest and best way to that? Soybeans. Right? I think we think, well, wait, but wouldn't that be kind of boring? Yes. It would be boring. But nobody would be suffering, nobody would be impoverished, nobody would be hungry, everybody would be fed, it would be better. Now, I think you don't just automatically think, yes, it would. What are we having for dinner tonight? Soybean chicken, right, or whatever, right? I think that's the worry that Nietzsche has, that we want an exciting, interesting world, but if we look at the world of people who produce the excitement, the ones who write the music, the ones who make the movies, the ones who do all the stuff that actually keeps us from collapsing from boredom, right, they are not your average kids, right? They are something special. And so we kind of need them. And if we thought, well, if we got rid of those, and everybody could be just kind of okay, nobody was hungry, nobody was living in a slum, wouldn't that be better? And Nietzsche says, that is not an unvaluable thing, but it needs to be seen as part of a system of values, of which that's only one, not as if it's the principal value. So you see the way Nietzsche operates. His thought is always like this. It's always, right, to say, it's only when there's this kind of creative tension between values that new values and better values are produced. If you home in on and make one dominant over all the others, you're not seeing actually the mechanisms and things that make the world a world worth living in. Right? So that's the thought is what we want is a happy